Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for Winter Seed Sowing, Growing Native Plants from Seed. This is brought to you by the Putnam Pollinator Pathway, an initiative of Cornell Cooperative Extension. Today, we have two Master Gardener volunteers presenting. Lynn Bernstein has been a Master Gardener volunteer since 2014. Last year, she donated hundreds of hours of her time, mostly to the Putnam Pollinator Pathway Initiative. She gardens to create sustainable native habitat. Her mantra is, "What would nature do?" Catherine Sorrow Thompson has been a Master Gardener volunteer since 2018. She is an aficionado of butterflies and insects, a lover of the outdoors. She has a passion for native plants. I'm sure that will be quite evident in her part of the presentation. And with that, I turn it over to Lynn.
Hey. Thank you, Jane Ellen. I'm Lynn Bernstein. I'm here with Catherine Sorrow Thompson, as Jane Ellen said, and we're going to be talking about growing native plants from seeds using the winter sowing method. So what is winter sowing? We're going to talk about what it is, why it works, the advantages of sowing seeds in the winter and sowing native plants from seed, and how to do it. But first, Catherine's going to tell you a little bit about the Putnam Pollinator Pathway and native plants.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to share my screen, and I have to find this. I guess that's it. No, so I'm not sharing the right one. I apologize. Okay, slideshow. So we are getting there. I apologize. I wasn't completely ready. So before we get into winter sowing, I wanted to say a few words about the Putnam Pollinator Pathway. What it is, what are we alluding to when we speak about pollinator pathway? The concept itself was founded by a lady named Sarah Bergman back in 2008 on the West Coast in Seattle. So she had received a grant by the city of Seattle to create a garden, to design a garden, as well as create artistic signs. So it was sort of an in situ installation for which she was paid $6,000, something like this. Her idea was, let's connect greeneries, let's connect green spaces so that insects and pollinators can actually flow from one place to another. And what they were doing is or what she was doing was to connect two spaces. One was the Seattle University, so the green campus, and the second was the Nora Woods, which is an area where there's quite a bit of native plants. All of this in Seattle. And the connection was a mile long, 12 inches wide. So basically she was taking the sidewalk, right? And she designed and planted gardens all along, which each homeowner was also taking care of as it was. So she was hoping that the idea was going to spread, and it actually did. And it's an idea that made a lot of converts. It just went like wildfire throughout the country. In the Northeast, we have the Northeast Pollinator Pathway, so that encompasses quite a few of our states. And in Putnam County, we founded the Putnam Pollinator Pathway in connection with Cornell Cooperative Extension 2 years ago. And the concept is the following: to connect fragmented landscape by creating a pollinator-friendly corridor of contiguous spaces, private gardens, public parks, schools, libraries, hospital gardens, anything, right, throughout the county and beyond. So we've been pretty busy for 2 years, and we've added 120 households that have signed on to the Pollinator Pathway. That amounts to 92 acres of land in Putnam, so that's quite a bit. Our nature resource director at the Cornell Cooperative Extension said that equates to 4,014,711 square feet. And she added, if you're a bee, that's a lot of square footage. So you can sign up to that too. You can be part of the Putnam Pollinator Pathway. You can actually advertise it. You can buy a sign and have it planted at your in your garden. And if your garden is close enough to the street or to your neighbors, perhaps that will engender conversation, and you can help spread the word for the pollinators. So a pollinator pathway is constituted of a lot of native plants. But we'll be speaking about this. Lynn, I think you want to speak a little bit about what the winter sowing is about and the native plants, or am I going on into the native plants right away?
I think you can go on and talk about why native, and then I'll come back. We'll talk about why winter sowing.
Okay. So when we speak, what's so great about native plants? Well, when we speak about native plants, we usually refer to two factors. One is the human factor, in which humans have not interfered with the plants. And then the second one is a geographical factor, whereby it defines a native plants as occupying a particular area, a region, a habitat, or an ecosystem, to distinguish native from non-native. And there's a definition that was offered by Vasovsky in the American Gardener in 1998, which I think really summarizes it very well. It says, and I quote, "Native plants should be defined as those that have evolved and adapted to a specific location and have remained genetically unaltered by humans." And that really says it exactly. So now that the proper introduction has been made, what's so great about native plants? Well, there are actually quite a few good reasons to invite native plants in your garden. One of them is they're extremely pretty, they're colorful, they add texture, etc. But outside of offering beauty and colors and helping the climate by storing CO2, they also are really low maintenance. Once they're established, native plants usually don't require much maintenance. They don't require any fertilizer. They just adapt to their environment. And they're also helping water conservation. Because native plants are adapted to the local environmental conditions, such as the climate, they know that they're not going to get a lot of water in certain months and then more water in others. So they don't require you to help them with the water. That saves you time, that saves you money, and maybe perhaps the most valuable element and resource of it all, that saves you water. Because think about the Northeast consumption of water. Lawns take 30% of the water consumption in the Northeast of the United States. 30%. That's quite a bit. And when you have native plants, the deep root system that they have increases the soil capacity to retain and to store the water. So they reduce the water runoff, and they can even consequently reduce flooding. Another thing that they're doing is that when they're native to an area, and by area, I mean a region, a county, a state, they're suited to the soil composition. So as well as the specific climate condition, as I was saying before. So for instance, in Putnam County, they're going to survive the cold winters, but they're also going to survive the heat in the summer because they're just used to it. This is how they evolved. And they'll survive the soil composition. They'll accommodate themselves absolutely fine with it and thrive with the soil composition. They'll even thrive with the rocks that we have in Putnam County, right? They'll have to navigate, their root system is going to have to navigate all these rocks. And if you have native plants, you're going to attract some animals, and I'm going to speak a little more about that topic later. Plants are the only, and this is important, plants are the only organism capable of transforming the sunlight into energy in the form of sugar. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have dreamed about being able to photosynthesize. Well, think again, the only people who can do this on the planet are the plants. And every animal on this planet derives its food, gets its food directly or derives its food from plants, whether they eat it or they ate something that ate it, but plants are the ticket. And the most important group of animals that take the energy from the plants and pass it on to the other animals are the insects. And the plants and the insects have co-evolved into relationships, and sometimes extremely specialized relationships in which the insects can only eat a certain group of plants and sometimes only one plant. So you begin to see why it's important to plant the flowers or the shrubs or the trees so that the local insect can recognize the plants and use them as food. So this is really, really important. When we speak of native plants, the link between biodiversity and the disappearance of life on Earth, including our disappearance, isn't immediately apparent. And that might be because of their size, because the insects are the link. Edgar Wilson, who is a scientist, entomologist, he loves ants, he studies ants forever, that's all he does, wrote a paper back in the 80s in 1987, and he titled the paper, "The Little Things That Run the World." And he really meant it. Insects are at the very source, as I said, of our sustenance and our survival on the planet. So many animals depend on insects for their food. Sometimes animals we don't think about, like fish, for instance, trouts, salmon, very heavy insect feeders, birds, including the one we eat, like turkeys, amphibians, even humans. You know, I'm sure Westerners, as we are, don't think necessarily of picking up a cricket and putting it in our plate. But think about that again, because 80% of the world consumes insects, such as in Asia, in Africa, in South America. So that's a lot of insect eaters, and pound for pound, they're a better protein source than meat. So this may be a thing of the future, but that's another story. That's not for today. Without the insects and without, well, I should say, without pollinators, and not all pollinators are insect, but a large amount of them are, we wouldn't have any flowering plants, because no pollination, no flowering plants. Huh? And 90% of our plants in our country have to undergo pollination in order to exist. So I made my point. Without the insect, no decomposition and return to healthy soil. No control of pests, because they eat one another. No more food for the birds and the fishes, etc., as I was just saying. And most birds cannot survive without the presence of insect caterpillars and worms, etc. I'm sure you've heard this talk of Doug Tallamy, the entomologist in Delaware University, who speaks about that in very passionate words. He said, well, he actually had one of his students sit under a tree and figure out how many caterpillars, how many worms does it take for this little chickadee to feed a clutch of young. And is it 1? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 10? Well, by the time they were finished counting, it was 6,000. So yes, 5, 10, 20 is not enough. We need an enormous and abundance of insects in order to feed the food web. So if we are to lose many insects, the overall biodiversity would, of course, significantly be reduced. And given the diversity and abundance, it's really inevitable that insects are intimately involved in all terrestrial and freshwater food chains and food webs, excuse me. So if we place our garden in our garden, the food that they cannot recognize, in other words, if you place plants that are not native and that they don't know about, then all they're going to do is grow hungry and probably die. So what does that do to us? Well, it's our food choices would be quite limited if we didn't have the action of the pollinators. The absence of bees and other pollinators would wipe out a lot of the crops that we rely upon. And this is quite visible on these two pictures that I'm showing you right here. On the top, we have a healthy pollinating population. And so therefore our supermarkets are filled with fruits, vegetables, etc. But then on the bottom, this is a side view of what it would look like without the action of pollinators. Humans rely on a well-functioning ecosystem for food and for survival, from the agricultural lands to our supermarket shelves. And really, we've relied on animal pollination for our food supply from our hunter-gathering ancestors and to our nowadays foraging habits, right? And the specialization between the plants and the insect is really important. This is what we call host plant. And we also call, when we have a specialization between a plant and an insect for pollination, it means that only one particular insect can come and pollinate that particular plant. Now, this is not the case for all plants. A lot of plants are generalists, but there are also certain plants. And here is one example, for instance, which will resonate with us. Theobroma. Theobroma is, the literal translation is food for the gods. We call it chocolate, right? But that flower that you can see blooming right out of the bark of that Theobroma cannot set a cocoa pod without the help of a teeny midge called a Forcipomia. And a little trivia here, the Forcipomia male is the one that does the pollinating, and the female either relax or they go on biting other people. But so this is a good example of a very specialized relationship between a pollinator and a pollinated plant. So we know now that insects are important. I think I've driven my points heavily. Edgar Wilson, who I already mentioned, who wrote the book Half Earth, that I strongly encourage you to take a reading of, or maybe review it a little bit, said that without insects, the environment would collapse into chaos and billions would starve, billions of living beings of all sorts, including us. And another biologist who I like very much, he's got very colorful metaphors, his name is Paul Ehrlich. He likened the loss of species, of an ecosystem, to rivets that be popping out of the wing of an airplane. Meaning, if you take 1, 2, 3, 4 rivets of the wings of the airplane, more than likely the plane is going to go on flying with no problem. But should you take 10, 20, 50 rivets out, a catastrophic failure is going to occur, which is in a time fashion unpredictable. We don't know when the plane is going to crash, but the plane is going to crash. And so is the ecosystem, because the insects are the rivets that keep the ecosystem functioning. So far, since 50 years, they've disappeared by 75%. Okay, I'm stopping with the alarming news, but there it is. And to add, and it's obviously directly linked, but the World Wildlife Fund has established that since 1970, 2/3 of the wildlife has disappeared. Wildlife as a generality. So, whereas a relatively small proportion of species has gone extinct, and surely we find new species every day, what is certain is that almost all wild species exist nowadays in numbers that are just a fraction of their former abundance. So they're just so little in numbers, and they subside in very degraded areas and very fragmented habitats. And that is a very important point, because the fragmentation of the habitat is another key element to the further disappearance of the insects and the wildlife. This is a metaphor that was put out by David Quammen, who wrote The Tangled Tree, another great reading. Just giving you some books for your for the next few weeks of winter. He compared the ecosystem to a Persian rug. So here is that big Persian rug, totally functioning, absolutely gorgeous. And now to the right of it is a picture of, so what is, are these 70 new Persian rug, or no, they're just only fragment of what the Persian rug used to be. And can our insects survive on fragments? Well, that is the big problem. No, they don't. So what do we need to do? We need to stitch the rug back together. And when we say we, it means it's a collective effort. It's not a big effort, but it's just a conscious, dedicated effort. That means recreate the bridges between the areas that are left, that we've not destroyed yet, and try to keep them as native as possible, but also recreate viable areas everywhere we can think of, in our towns, in our malls, on our sidewalks, just like Sarah Bergman did, right? Most of all, in our gardens. It's really important that the work that we do in our garden is so important. Because think about this, 78% of the land in our country, in the United States, is privately owned. So if you think, oh, that's okay, you know, they have all the state parks and they have all of the federal parks, and they can survive. Well, no, because there's not enough space left. So we have a responsibility to rebuilding nature where we've destroyed it and elsewhere. So we really have to reunite enough of the specialized relationships between the native plants and the insects that feed on them so that we have functional ecosystem. So that's really an important part. So how do we go about restoring these ecosystems? Well, we got to start with the building blocks, flowering plants and the pollinators that allow them to reproduce. The fun part could be deciding which flowering plants you'd like to have in your garden, you know, which color, which size, etc. Or, and then you can build on the expectation of which pollinator is gonna come and visit them. What guest is gonna come for dinner tonight, right? Maybe not that very pollinator, but you're going to start seeing a difference, and maybe you want to record that difference. Maybe you want to take pictures. Maybe you want to identify them. Maybe you can use iNaturalist app on your phone. I'm sure you know about that, and take pictures, and then maybe share them to the greater community, and that becomes a metadata of information that can be referred to because of all of this wonderful technology we have, like GPS. So we know that, for example, I know that I had a wheel bug on my porch, and I didn't know what a wheel bug was, believe it or not. And I took a picture, and iNaturalist told me, oh yeah, that's what you have here. So one of the fun part of having in the pollinators come to your garden is that they are just spectacular. I have personally a passion for butterfly, and so if you're taking a look at this gorgeous butterfly here, the Eastern tiger swallowtail, it has an equally amazing caterpillar as a larvae in its stage of life. I don't know if you know that, but butterflies, when they're caterpillars, have 4 stages. So the caterpillar is going to look different at 4 stages of its life before it finally unleashes its wings and becomes a butterfly. So the swallowtail here is native from that's the East tiger swallowtail. It's native from the eastern part of the United States. But it's also common in very different types of habitats. It's going to fly between the spring and the fall, and it will produce about 2 to 3 broods. So it's pretty prolific. And its common host plant, and Lynn is going to speak a lot about this, the host plant, which is what the caterpillar feeds on, is the Liriodendron tulipifera. What a surprise. We got plenty of tulip trees. That's a native tree from our areas. It also feeds on the wild black cherry tree, which is a very prolific, it's a wonderful tree for the local insects. second after the oak. So these are, if you have these trees, then you're gonna have these caterpillars. It will also, the butterfly itself, of course, will come if you have topaz, if you have all the native plants, the butterfly will come to feed on them. Another wonderful butterfly is the morning cloak. That's just absolutely gorgeous, the Nymphalis antiopa. It has an equally amazing caterpillar that you see on the left-hand side there. It's one of the earliest butterfly you're going to see in the spring because it overwinters as an adult. And it will hide in the crevices that are trees, and it also hide in leaf litter. So you got to be careful in the spring when you're in all gung-ho and you want to clean up your garden because you've left it a mess for all of the insects for the entire winter. And now you want to start planting and you want to start moving away all the leaves or the debris. Well, hold on a second. Just make sure you leave a week of full 60-degree weather pass before you undertake your cleaning, because this is where the mourning cloak is. He's underneath the leaf debris and he's waiting for that warm weather to come out and re-emerge. So you have to be careful of how you treat your garden. The first generation adults usually emerge in early summer and they estivate until the fall when they re-emerge. So that's the life of the mourning cloak. And what do they eat? Well, they eat salix, which is willow. They also eat, and we got plenty of them, they also eat the American elm. Well, good luck with that, because we don't have too many of them left, unfortunately. They've been decimated, but it also eats paper birch. Paper birch is also a native of our area. So, and if you have hackberries, same thing, the caterpillars will be there. Other butterflies, like for instance, the American painted lady. So that's it's actually two butterflies, the American lady and the painted lady. The difference between the two is if you're looking at the outer wing, the bottom part has 2 eyes, so that's the American lady, and the painted lady has 4 eyes, which I didn't put a second picture of it, but that's an incredible butterfly, because we always think about the monarch because it migrates so far and it flies for thousands of miles, and it's just mind-boggling how they can do this. But so does the American lady. It does go to the southern part of the States as well as Mexico. And what does it eat? How can you feed that caterpillar? Well, this is really simple. It eats Artemisia, and Artemisia is your mugwort. So we certainly got plenty of that. It also eats mallows. It also eats thistles. So it's a very easy butterfly to see in your garden. The next picture is the black swallowtail, and that swallowtail will love as a caterpillar to eat carrots and parsley. So you better start cooking. Another one, another picture to the right of it, and I want to make a special point about this. This is the giant checkered moth. I picked that one because it's spectacular. It's big, it's huge. You're only going to see her at night. And that's my point. A lot of the flowers, not all of them, of course, but a good deal of flowers will be pollinated at night when you're sleeping. And therefore, if you're leaving your porch light on or any of the lights on your property, guess what? You're stopping that flower from being pollinated, because these insects are now visible, or whatever pollinator is doing the pollination are now visible from other predators, and they're being eaten. So you have to keep the lights off, let them live at night, and let the giant checkered moth caterpillar do its thing. It will eat broadleaf plants like the violets, the sunflowers, the basil, the dandelions, and I'm sure this is plenty of things that you already have in your garden. It also feeds on willows, mulberries, maples, cherries. So if you need more information to figure out who is the host plant to whom, one of the great sources is, if you go online, it's called Ask Mr. Smarty Plants. And it's on the Lady Bird Johnson website. So if you go to www.wildflower.org, you will find it. You can also go to the North American Butterfly Association that you see the URL of right here at the bottom of the slide. All this information is on the information sheet that we have sent to you, so don't rush into writing everything. It's already all done, as well as quite a few of the books and readings that I have mentioned through the presentation. So whether you're looking to attract certain spectacular butterflies or unusual moth, or whether you're just looking to plant a pollinator garden, or just have showy, beautiful, healthy native plants in your garden, you can start early in the dead of winter, and you can start by winter sowing the seeds of the native plants that you've either collected or that you've purchased or that you've exchanged. And some vetting is important for that, but Lynn is going to speak about this. And with that, I will turn it over to Lynn.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. Let's see if I can get, okay, so it should be obvious now why pollinators are so important. They're so critical to the survival of all life, and not just for producing seeds to produce more plants, but also as food for birds and mammals, including us, seeds and fruit that we all rely on. So when E.O. Wilson said, "A world without insects is a world without life," he wasn't being hyperbolic. Without the pollinators, we wouldn't have plants, we wouldn't have animals, we wouldn't have life. So why are we talking about this in the context of winter sowing? Well, when we've been talking about the pollinator pathway, meeting with people and talking about native plants, the first question out of everyone's mouth is, where can I get native plants? Unfortunately, the nursery industry hasn't really kept up, and they sell what there's demand for, and they don't necessarily try to change their customers' thinking into buying native plants when they're used to seeing all these exotic, non-native, beautiful plants, but they don't support our pollinators or our wildlife. So we've begun to teach winter sowing because we want to encourage people to plant native plants and to give them a good way to get them inexpensively and easily. So what is winter sowing? It's a method of plant propagation that simulates natural processes of plant reproduction under partly controlled conditions in order to protect the seeds from predators, wind, flooding, frost, and other threats that would hinder successful germination and growth. So I want to stress that it simulates natural processes of plant reproduction. We're not doing anything artificial. We're just sort of enforcing the natural, what would nature do? That's what we're doing. That's my mantra, and that's what I say we're doing, what nature would do. But we're protecting the seeds a little bit so they have a leg up. The advantages of winter sowing are many. First, it's very simple and inexpensive. And if you've ever tried to grow vegetable seeds to germinate them indoors before you take them outside, you've probably encountered all that paraphernalia that lines your windowsills, lights, heat mats, misters, all kinds of other things that people try to create good seedlings. It takes up all the space in your living room. Well, none of that here for winter sowing. It's all done outdoors, and we need no special equipment. In fact, we're going to be using recyclables before they go out for collection. It has none of the issues of hardening off, of fungus gnats, of anything, any of those diseases that you would encounter trying to grow seeds indoors. We don't have to deal with it. You get your gardening fix in the winter. I mean, how many of us are sitting here saying, I wish it would warm up so I could get planting. Here's the way to do it in January and February. And finally, it works. Winter sowing just plain works. So what are the benefits of propagating from seed? You may know there are two ways of propagating plants. One is sexual, that's growing from seed, and the other is asexual, sometimes called clonal. And that's what nurseries do, nursery growers do. When you divide a plant or you take a cutting, you are doing asexual clonal reproduction, and the babies of those plants are identical genetically to the parents. So a nursery can grow, hundreds of plants that are identical, look exactly the same, and then they know exactly what they're going to have to sell the following season because they know what it came from. And this is very good for the nursery industry, a very reliable way to propagate plants. But it doesn't do anything to increase the genetic diversity of those species. So growing from seed is sexual propagation, much the way people and animals reproduce. You get genes from the male and genes from the female, and they combine into new genetic combinations. And so each subsequent generation, each seed-grown plant is slightly different from its parents. And that allows the plants to evolve so that each generation is a little bit more evolved and better able to meet the demands of the environment it's in, whether it's changing climate or new pests that are introduced. Those evolutionary stages are very important for maintaining the species. And another thing I love about growing from seed, and let me say that I was not a believer in this, and I was impatient most of my gardening life, and I didn't want to be bothered with seeds. I wanted to go buy plants or just take divisions to make more. But I'll tell you that aspect of the surprise of not knowing exactly what's going to come or when it's going to come is really very exciting, and I wouldn't grow any other way now. So I hope, if you're not yet a true believer, stick with us, and I think we may change your minds. So why does winter sowing work? So plants native to our area expect 4 distinct seasons in each growing cycle. In their growing year, they expect a spring, a summer, a winter, and a fall. And they have various stages that they go through each of those seasons in their growth. They need a period of cold to break dormancy. The seeds themselves have a seed coat, a hard seed coat, which is a protective device, a natural device to protect them from early dormancy. And the germination is triggered by changes in temperature, in precipitation, and in daylight, both the length of the day and the quality of the daylight. So the seeds know when it's time to wake up. They're in the ground just waiting. And if you see the bottom right corner here, these happen to be just black bean seeds, but I soaked them a little bit, and you can see the seed coat begins to break apart, and there is the very first root shoot coming out. It's called a radicle, and that comes out first, and then the seed begins to grow. But you'll notice all of these seeds I put in to soak at the same time, and 2 of them are doing pretty well. The others are just still sort of waiting. And that's how nature is. Nature takes its time, but each seed will know when the right time is. So I want to mention that this works for our seeds, native to our area, because they expect our cold winters. They're used to it, they evolved here, and this is what they want. And this, if you're not familiar with this, this is the plant hardiness zone map. You're all probably familiar with what planting zone you live in. If you're here in Putnam County, you're going to be either 6A or 6B. You might be more in the 5B range if you're a little further north or up high, the way I am, in a higher elevation. But for the most part, our area here in Putnam County is going to be in the 6s. And you'll see that this is the green band, that's the 6A. It goes all the way across the country. That doesn't mean that anything that grows over here is going to be native here where we are. It has nothing to do with whether a plant is native. It has to do with whether a plant can survive our winters, but that doesn't make it native. There are many other factors that will play a role in whether a plant can thrive in our area besides cold hardiness. But up until recently, we've all relied on the cold hardiness zone. Will it grow in 6? Will it grow in 5? Because that's what the nursery industry has been telling us. They put a tag in our pots that say, zone 6. So we buy it. But it doesn't mean that it's native, that it's going to support the insects that we have in our area. Here's just a close-up of New York. Look at this, is New York State has planting zones from 3B to 7B. I mean, that's a huge number of planting zones. And to say something is native to New York, well, it's maybe native to part of New York, not likely native to every part of New York. So again, it's important when you're planting for pollinators to understand which pollinators are in that area and what plants they want and need. So as Catherine said, the insects have evolved to have specialized relationships with the plants that are their hosts. In many cases, they can only eat 1 or 2 species of plants. And if we want them, we need to plant those species. Just down below on the right is just a close-up of Putnam County. For those of you who are here in the county with us, you can see most of the county is going to be 6A, a small part in the west along the Hudson, and down along the Westchester border will be 6B. And I just want to throw this map out because you may never have seen it. And it's not a bad idea to become familiar with the concept of plant heat zone. And this is a new concept because now we're dealing with changes in temperature. It's not just a matter of how cold it gets in your area, but now it's become important to know how hot it gets and how long it stays hot. So this map is displaying information about how many days an area is above 86 degrees, because not every plant can survive that heat. Even though it's been native in your area, we're finding some plants are moving north. We say they're moving north because it's getting too hot for them. And so they're beginning not to thrive. They're beginning to die in the areas that are too hot in the southern parts of their range. And they're moving further north into colder areas just to escape the heat. So it's something to keep in mind. I don't know if the nursery industry will ever pick up this map and include this information on their tags, but it's something that you can research as you're beginning to think about what you're going to plant in your gardens. Okay, so when you're starting to do winter sowing, you need to get seeds. And I just want to give you a little heads up that you need to vet your species. You need to know what is native in your area. And I'll go one step further and say that even if a certain plant is native to my area, there's yet another distinction, which is local ecotypes. And those would be seeds that are very specifically from your immediate region, not from 300 miles away. So I can pick a seed, pick species that I want to grow, and I might be able to buy it online or swap with someone, say in Ohio. Now, Ohio, same planting zone, same heat zone, but it's not a local ecotype. And some people are very, very specific. They only want a local ecotype, something that's been grown within 50 or 100 miles of where they are. So that's just something to mention. It's a word to have in the back of your head as you're beginning to do your research. So you can find out what's native in your area by looking at wildflower.org. It's not going to get into local ecotypes, but it is going to tell you the native distribution of the plants. Your county extension should have a good list. In Putnam County, we have a great list of native plants. And then there's the Biota of North America program, has a wonderful plant atlas, and you can browse by county. And that's that website down in red. And beware of the freebies. If you buy plants online, seeds online, and they include a free packet, just beware that the free packet may be seeds that are from a very prolifically seeding plant, and you need to watch out for how that will grow in your area. And I'll give you a personal example. This is a cup plant that I wanted to have because I'd never seen it before. I'd never heard of it before, but I was very attracted to this, the way the leaf and the stem join. There's no petiole, it's perfoliate. And this forms a cup, as it's named for, and water accumulates in this little basin. And bees and birds, hummingbirds, come to drink from it. And I thought that's a very exciting thing. I wanted to have that in my garden so that I could watch nature happening and taking care of its own. And so I ordered these seeds from a very reputable seed vendor. And I'll just add that until recently, seed vendors were not too local to us here in New York. So you had no choice but to go outside the immediate area. But I ordered these seeds and planted it, and it's gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. I even love the buds on this plant before it blooms are themselves spectacular to look at. So, and I found out that this plant is on the invasive species list for New York State on the New York DEC website. And I was really heartbroken. I didn't want to take it out. So I did a little more research, and I learned that in fact, it's only considered invasive in the Adirondacks. So if you look hard enough, you can get that granular level of detail to see that you can't say it's invasive in New York, because New York, remember, has all those different planting zones, all those different ecoregions. So it's important to look specifically at your area. Now, it doesn't mean it won't become invasive in Putnam County if I let it go to seed too much, if it's too prolific, if there's nothing eating it. So you still need to watch, but you need to learn, where to get your information so that you can feel safe about planting. Okay, so nature has provided seeds with this protective measure to prevent premature germination. The seeds form in the summer, in the fall, they fall to the ground, the winter, the snow, the rain, the wind, blows them around and they hit the soil. And nature doesn't want things to germinate before the time is right. So the different strategies that that seeds have prevent that from happening. And each species, different species have different strategies, different germination strategies. And seed vendors have described these using germination codes. And you'll see that if you start looking in seed catalogs, you will see germination codes. And so that's what they're talking about. And basically it is what kind of preparation, what conditions does this seed need for germination? So some species don't need any special conditions. If you plant them in the fall or the spring, they will germinate just the same when it's time in the spring. Some need a period of cold stratification. That's cold, wet, that's snow, that's rain out in the cold for a certain period of time. And so you would plant those in the fall or winter. They would go through the winter outside the same way they do in the natural world with nobody intervening. Some need light. You plant those very shallowly on the surface. You don't cover them up. Some need more than one period of cold stratification. Some need a cold period, then a warm, followed by another cold cycle. So they would take 2 years to germinate. And then some need what's called scarification, which is a physical or chemical treatment. And the way that happens in nature is if something is out on the soil, getting pounded into the soil by rain and snow, and then it freezes and it expands and it thaws and it expands, that process breaks down the seed coat. You also see that happening when an animal bird or a mammal eats a particular seed, eats the fruit, it goes through the body, in the digestive system, the acids, whatever it is that's digesting that seed or fruit, breaks down that seed coat, and when it comes out the other end, it is ready to germinate. So there are growers who will do scarification artificially. It could be as simple as putting the seeds in water to soak for a while, the way I did with the black beans, or the way you probably do if you cook beans from scratch. It could be putting them in some sort of acid or scraping them with sandpaper. In winter sowing, we don't need to do any of that. We're just going to let nature do its thing. And what happens if nobody eats these seeds that need this kind of chemical treatment, it may take longer, but over time that seed coat will still break down. It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years, but it will break down. And when you're purchasing seeds, if you're purchasing them, or if you're harvesting your own, wherever you're getting your seeds from, you can check with the seed vendor catalogs for their germination codes, and each vendor has its own. So you might want to compare a couple to see what's the best strategy for you. Does it need 10 days of cold? Does it need 3 months of cold? And then you time your planting accordingly. Okay, Catherine, will you tell us about the seeds that we've given out?
Okay, thank you, Lynn. This was just exciting to hear. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everybody see? I hope. I suppose we do. Okay, so we've given you quite a few different types of seeds. I don't have probably the time to go over all of them. But let's take a few. I took 4 just to give you a bit of a aperçu of what their conditions are. The first one is the tall anemone. I always have a hard time saying that word because in French we call this anémone. Tall anemone, the Anemone virginiana. That name comes from the Greek word anemos, which means wind, and the epithet means from Virginia. So now the introduction is made. This is a plant that will have a germination code of B, which means that the seed is going to need a winter or a cold period to germinate. And so you can use this as the winter sowing seed. It will usually grow in dry to medium, well-drained soil. In full or partial, full sun of partial shade. It will tolerate full shade. So if you want to put it in full shade, that's fine. It prefers moist and sandy, humusy kind of soil. And it's not as aggressive as some other types anemones. So this one you can pretty much keep in the spot that you've planted it at. Whereas the others might start spreading a little, be a little more aggressive, but not that one. It's a spring blooming flower, and it'll grow up to about 2 feet tall. And then at the top of the stand, you'll see these small 1-inch diameter flowers that are erect onto the stem. So it's a very pretty. It has a lot of beautiful foliage, as you can see. It's a great plant to have around, great native plant. Another wonderful one, very colorful, the butterfly weed, the Asclepia tuberosa. So the Asclepia tuberosa comes from the Greek word Asclepios, which means the god of medicine, because they were using the roots, the tuberous roots, for lung conditions, and that's the First Nations used to use this for that. So the epithet means tuberous, Asclepia tuberosa, right? So the tuberous, it's a reference to the root of it. It's a it's easily grown. It'll do really well in poor soil. So if you have an area in full sun that is not a wonderful soil, it'll be very happy to make its home there. the new growth tend to emerge pretty late in the winter, in the summer, like towards almost towards the end of June. I have quite a few of them, and that's the reason why the reason for that is because that's when the monarch butterfly happens to fly in from its home in Mexico. So they'll take a little bit of time to establish themselves, but that's really the case with a lot of the perennials. The proverbial sleep, creep, and leap. They'll leap the third year, they'll sleep and creep for the two first one. But they will really establish themselves very well. They have really showy, gorgeous seed pods that grow on them towards the fall. And when the time is ripe, they open up and you have this silky supporting seed filament that are meant to blow with the wind so that the Asclepias tuberosa can self-seed, or you can just collect the seeds. Very often people will use these pods for flower arrangements, the seed pod, because they're really beautiful and showy. And they have, as I said, on the inside, these silky hair, silky tailed seed for dispersal in the wind. So that will take a germination code B, which means, again, it'll take a full winter, 90 days of cold to germinate for you. Another beautiful seed that we provided for you is the Zizia aurea. The Zizia aurea is an allusion, or is a reference to a German botanist called Johann Baptist Sis. And the epithet means golden. Aurea means golden. That will grow in average moisture in well-drained soils, in full sun to part shade. And it's a Northeast native perennials, and you'll see it in small colonies in the wild, in the forest, but also in the meadows. I mean, it accommodates itself in quite a few different habitats. The food plant for the golden Alexander is the food plant for the larvae of the black swallowtail. Remember, we spoke about that because it's the same family as the parsley, as a matter of fact. And so that is, as I said, again, a germination code B. Now, the last one, which is one of my favorite, this will grow 4 to 7 feet tall, the Joe Pye, the Eutritium purpureum. It's a butterfly favorite. You'll see all the butterfly flying and coming to feed on it. It has even a slight vanilla smell to it, the flower. The flower will bloom between July to September, end of July to September, pretty much. And it has these beautiful purple and pink flowers that worm around the stem on the very top. It's deer resistant, so it's perfect. And then if you have too much shade, it will be very happy to be there. If you have too much sun, it will be really happy to be there as well. So it will grow in multiple conditions for you. This is a plant that the Native Americans of the First Nation used to use to cure fevers. And it has a germination code of G, which is, so if you see on the right-hand side of your slide here, it says C, and then in parentheses, it says 30. And what that refers to is it wants to have a minimum of 30 days of cold. And so that's what it means, and it'll germinate for you. So these are the 4 seeds, but that I chose to speak about. I hope this will help you. You can revisit the information on the Lady Bird Johnson or on the CCE website. You'll find the information there too, and then also on our on this particular video, you can come back and take notes of the information that is provided to you on these slides. And with that, I give it back to Lynn.
Thank you. Before I go on, I just want to mention that the germination codes differ from source to source.
Yes, thank you for saying this.
Yes. So
Yeah.
that the B, C, whatever that Catherine was mentioned, you will find that in one vendor's catalog, but you will find something different in another. They are comparable, but not exactly aligned. The different seed vendors have just developed different ways of describing what needs to be done for their plants. So I just want you to be aware that you'll see different things. You might, for example, see something that is a C10. C10 in that case is not ABC, but it is C for cold and 10 for 10 days of cold stratification. You just need to be aware, and they all define their codes. So it's really not difficult. You just need to be aware that they differ. Okay, now we're going to move into the nitty-gritty of winter sowing, how we do it. And what I'm going to do, wait, before I do that, I want to just give a shout out to Robin Hoffman, another one of our Master Gardener volunteers, who created this lovely infographic for us describing the winter sowing process. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is walk through this process with you. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and actually do some planting to show you how it actually happens. And if you want to plant along with me, that's great. Okay, so what do you need for winter sowing? I said you didn't need all that paraphernalia that you need when you're starting seeds indoors, and it's true, but you do need something. So we start with containers, and there's a wide range of containers that we can use, and I'll be talking about that a little bit. You need a cutting tool or several different kinds of cutting tools to be able to get through your container. You need your seed starting medium. You need the seeds, of course. You need a marker or pencil or some way to mark on the containers what they are, because they will all look the same when they come up, and you will not remember what's what. You need labels of some kind. You need tape. Maybe you need tape. I'll talk about that in a minute. Water to water them, and then you need patience. Okay, let's talk about the containers. We have found that translucent plastic works best. The white milk jugs are not good. They don't let enough light through. And the clear plastic containers, like this one down here in the middle, they may let too much light through. So you have to watch. The plants could get burned if they're in the sun. So it depends on where you put them. But there are ways to deal with that too. If that's all you've got, there are ways you can paint the outside of it with a very thin coat of some kind of paint that just blocks the light a little bit. You want to aim for something that's at least 4 inches deep. And I stress that because I know that in the summer, when these things are growing, if they could outcompete me. And I get busy, as we all do in our gardens, and don't have time to be transplanting and moving things to larger containers all the time. So I want to know that they can stay put until things slow down in the garden, and then I can deal with them. So 4 inches is sort of the minimum for me. If you don't have anything that deep, then you're just going to have to be more watchful and transplant your plants sooner. Here in this bottom picture is somebody who's using regular, they look like 4-inch flower pots inside one of these sort of clear plastic storage totes. And he's drilled holes top and bottom. I think I would have put more holes at the top because you want the plants to be exposed to the rain and snow, and you want a way for the moisture to evaporate and good airflow. But this seems to work for him. Here, this is just a picture of a container that mushrooms came in that didn't have a top. So I inverted a lettuce container over it to make that dome. And then the picture on the right, the water jug that I think everyone in this group got, and another vegetable bin. We'll talk more about this. Here's another example. These are 2 plastic shoe boxes that I got, really inexpensively someplace, and there's a pot of seedlings growing inside it. This down here on the left is this is a styrofoam container that medicines and frozen food come in. And it's just covered with a sheet of plastic. It works fine. And over here on the right is a little bit more conventional way of doing winter sowing, where you're using regular flower pots, just covering them with this wire mesh to keep animals out of it. So you will find that you're going to start to see life as everything in life can be used for winter sowing, and you will be scrounging for containers in your off hours to expand your collection. Okay, now we're up to prepare the seeds and the containers. And what we do for the containers is first you want a nice clean container, and I like to use water jugs, which is what we provided the attendees in this class, because there's no cleaning involved. There's been nothing in there to clean out. But if you're using juice or vinegar or milk containers, you want to get them really clean. You're going to make the drainage holes, and you'll see I put the drainage holes, well, they're at the bottom and on the sides. I'll show you in a minute on a real life example. You want to make holes for ventilation. If you're using a jug, like a water jug or a milk jug, it's adequate just to take the top off, that cap on the top. And we cut the jugs around to create the hinge and a lid. And I like to line my containers with newspaper that prevents soil from washing out of the drainage holes. And it also holds a little moisture so that the seedlings, the soil stays damp a little bit longer. That's the big problem that I always have, which is why I use deep containers also, is everything getting watered. You need to water these things unless there's some place where there's an irrigation system, or if there has not been any rain. This is where I'm talking about going into the summer when things are growing. You want to make sure that things are adequately watered. We always say native plants don't need irrigation, but the seedlings do. So you need to watch out for that. So the newspaper helps me out a little bit, creating this sort of self-watering wicking system. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to fill the containers with your potting mix. And I say potting mix, you want to use a well-draining soil, but you want it to be moist when you put it in. So moisten your soil in advance, not dripping wet, but moist, so that you have, it's not flyaway. And I don't recommend seed starting mix because it is too light and airy and flyaway. I like using just a good potting soil, and I buy it at the end of the previous year or sometime during the previous summer, and I keep it knowing that I'm going to use it for winter sowing, because it's not always possible to find potting mix in the winter. And again, you want to allow about 4 inches. You're going to spread the seeds and water them in. You're going to press the seeds in gently. You want to have good soil contact. And you're going to cover them if it's appropriate. If these are seeds that need light to germinate, or these tiny little powdery-like seeds, you don't cover them. You just press them into the soil. If they're larger seeds, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute, then you want to press them down into the soil so that they're flush with the top. And you can cover that lightly with some soil and press it down gently so that everything is kind of closed up nicely. And you water gently but thoroughly. Okay, and this is an example of some seeds that I've just pressed onto the soil. And then on the right is what I use to water with. You could use a spray bottle or you could use a watering can. I like this. I just took the top from the water bottle and drilled holes in it to create a little bit of a shower spray. And then I can get a firm but gentle diffuse spray of water. Okay, the next thing is label, 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 label. And I would say that over and over again. You may think that you remember what you planted, I guarantee you will forget, because they all look the same when they come up. So you want to label inside and outside, underneath, wherever you can. The problem with labeling is often if you use something like a Sharpie, it fades. And so I advocate using pencil, just a plain number 2 pencil, and writing that on a tag. And I think we gave you some tags. I like to use Venetian blinds, old Venetian blind slats. You know, everybody's got these Venetian blinds that go bad, and so cut them down, and then you can write on them. The number 2 pencil is beautiful on these, and it doesn't come off. In fact, when I try to reuse them, I can't erase the pencil. So it works very well. Here's another system that a lot of people use. They number their jugs, and so all you need to worry about is a number. You're not writing anything about the species on there. And then they keep a list of what the numbers correspond to, and could say when they planted it, or where in the garden they intend to plant it, or any special needs that it has. Which reminds me, when I'm doing plant tags on these, I very often will I'll write the botanical name, the common name, and then if it has some special conditions, some special, you know, when if it's slow to germinate, if I don't expect to see it till the following year, or how many days of stratification it needs. I might, if it's a plant I'm not familiar with, I will write some tips to myself so that I can remember what it is and how to treat it. Okay, now the question of to tape or not to tape. If you do any looking online or in social media about winter sowing, which I encourage you to do because there's a wonderful community of winter sowers out there. I mean, it's amazing what you can learn just by following some of these groups or reading websites. You will see a lot of people will tape their containers all the way around to keep them closed. And I did that for the first few years, and it was such a hassle to tape them up. The tape, it was cold, the tape didn't come off the roll. And then when I needed to open them up to inspect or to release condensation, it was again another struggle. So I stopped taping my jugs. And what I do now is I just make a little slit, which I'll show you in a minute, slit here. And then I just insert the top into the bottom. You could put one little piece of tape right there, but the point is we're not creating a sealed environment. We're creating an enclosed environment, but it's not sealed. So it's perfectly okay if it's not totally sealed up. You just want to have a little bit of protection, and that's what this dome lid is all about. This middle picture is it's 2 lettuce containers put together, because the lid that comes with it is flat, and you couldn't grow seedlings with the flat lid. They'll hit the lid as soon as they're up for a couple of weeks. So I made the dome, make a hole in the sides, and attach it with twist ties so that I've got a hinge. I can open and close it, and I have enough height for the seedlings to grow. Okay, then you're going to place the containers outside in a shaded or partly shaded area. And that's kind of important because you don't want them to dry out. And that's what happens when it starts getting warm into the spring and the seedlings are growing. You'll be watering them every day. You'll be, worrying about them. So if you put them in a partly shaded or fully shaded area, they will grow, they will germinate, and they won't dry out as quickly. And this is what they'll look like. They're out there under the snow, and you're saying, oh my gosh, how are they going to live? How are they going to survive? So you got to understand that these seeds expect that, because normally they'd be out there in the snow anyway, where they'd fall from the plants to the ground, and there they would be. And this is what they look like in the spring when they start germinating, and you open them up, you will have jugs and jugs of seedlings. While you're waiting for them to germinate, you're going to You're going to wait patiently and you're going to check for moisture. If there's a lot of condensation collecting on the top, there should be some, but if there's a lot, if it's dripping, open them up a little. I prop them open. I'll show you a picture in a minute. I prop them open with a stick just to get a little more airflow. And I want to point out this picture on the right is milkweed seeds, and they all came from the same pod. Same plant, same pod. They went into the same container in the same soil at the same time. And look, some have germinated and are coming along very nicely. Some just putting out their little radicals. Whoops. And others are just lying here doing nothing. Now, it's possible they won't germinate, but it's more likely that they will germinate just a little bit later, because this again is nature's way of saying, I don't want everything to germinate all at once, because what happens if then something comes through and eats them, or there's a flood and they all get washed away? At least some germination hasn't occurred, so it can still occur. And this is a preservation strategy for each species. And I want to tell you the story of this Calacanthus floridus. This was my very first winter sowing project, and I was given these seeds from a friend who had this beautiful shrub in her yard, and I wanted one, and she said, here, plant it. And she told me, you know, what to do, to put it in a container and put it outside in the snow. And I said, not going to happen. There's no way that I can grow this beautiful shrub from this little seed, and certainly not in the middle of winter. And she said, do it. And I was a disbeliever, but I did it because I knew she was going to ask me about it. And the following spring, nothing happened. The jug was empty. Nothing was in it. So the next winter, when I was looking around for containers and soil to do my winter sowing, I took that jug and I planted something else in it. The following spring, that something else came up, and then there was this woody stick coming out of it. And I didn't know what it was, but I just left it alone. And lo and behold, out in the middle of, coming out of the middle of that jug was the beginning of a Carolina allspice shrub from that seed that I had planted 2 years before. So that seed is one that requires a long period of stratification. You could scarify it, you could soak it, you could sand down the hard seed coat. You can see it has a very hard seed coat, or you can just let nature do its thing and take its time, and eventually it will happen. And there it is. Now it's a full-grown shrub. Okay, you're going to need to let light, air, and water in, but you don't want too much of any of that. So you'll have to watch as your seedlings are growing. And as I said, I prop mine open a little. I don't always remove it right away. I just prop it open and let it breathe a little. And then if we're expecting a frost or some cold nights, I just remove the sticks and close them up again. I don't tape them up. I just close them up so that they can survive a frost or even a late snow. You remove the tops completely when the temperature is warm and the seedlings are getting big. They're beginning to poke up. And the day and I would say the temperatures aren't going to go below 50. Then you're safe removing the tops completely. And I cut them off. You see, I cut the handle of the jug a couple inches up so that I still have a handle. So makes it easier to pick up these little, bottoms of jugs and move them around as I'm working with them in the garden. Okay, aftercare. So at some point, your seedlings are going to grow so much that they're too big for the jugs. And you can do a number of things. You can take the whole hunk of soil out with all the seedlings and put them into a larger container, a flower pot, just something bigger, maybe 3 or 4 times the size of a water jug. That's the easy way. You could also cut them up into pieces. So you could just cut them into chunks. This is what's known in the winter sowing world as hunk of seedlings. You take a hunk of your seedlings and you plant them into their own flower pots. You could put them out into the garden right away. I don't recommend it because these are still very small, and I won't say fragile, but they are they're more delicate than a mature plant, and they could get lost. If you're putting them into a bed that has other larger plants in it, they could become overshadowed by them. You could lose sight of them. The one exception I make is with milkweed, because actually also zizia sometimes, the butterflies need them. And if the butterflies, the monarchs and the swallowtails have consumed the host plants that they're on, all those caterpillars are devouring the leaves and they're running out of food, I will take my jugs of the either the zizia or the milkweed, whichever species of butterfly I'm feeding, and I will either plant the hunks of seedling into the ground right at the base of the plant that they are finishing up on, or I will just put the jugs there, right there on the ground. If there's room, I'll just put the jug there so that they will come down off the plant that they're eating that's almost all gone, and they will find what I've put there for them. And that works very well. I find that's better than trying to move the caterpillars from one plant to another part of the garden where I might have more of that. So I just keep giving them more servings. Okay, then you're going to enjoy the flowers. You're going to watch the pollinators, and they're going to pollinate your flowers, and you're going to get seeds. You're going to harvest the seeds and put them back in for next year's winter sowing. And that's how the cycle continues. Okay, so I think that is, one couple more slides about where to get seeds. Obviously, we need seeds. So where do you get seeds? Your own plants is a place to start. They're right there, and you'll learn when the seeds are ripe and which are the seeds. You don't want to confuse the seed head with the seeds themselves, so you'll learn that. You can get that information off of the internet. You can harvest seeds from friends' plants. You can go to seed swaps, and I hope maybe the Putnam Pollinator Pathway will have a seed swap next year, because it's a great way to meet people and to get seeds. And social media groups, if you're involved in social media, dozens of seed swaps, and there are also individuals out there who will swap seeds with you. You just say, hey, I'm looking for such and such seed, anybody have it? And you'll be surprised at how many responses you get. And so this reminds me to encourage you to harvest some extra seeds, even though you don't want to plant that particular species, because you may have enough. If you harvest your own seeds, then you have something to bring to a swap, and that's very helpful. Garden clubs often have seed swaps, the same way they have plant sales and plant swaps. You can sometimes get permission to harvest seeds in public gardens and parks, but you need permission for that. Roadsides, you don't need permission for. I've stopped along the road many times and collected seeds for things, just park safely. Private gardens, of course, again, with permission only. And then there are seed companies. You can go online and you can buy seeds. But as I showed you with my experience with the cup plant, you need to be sure that they're native in your area, because they may be native where the seed company is, but not in your area. Okay, one last thing. I just want to leave you with a comment from Trudy Davidoff. She's the woman who coined the phrase winter sowing and turned it into really a craze. She got the FDA to acknowledge winter sowing as an accepted method of plant propagation. And she was talking to someone who had said that her husband didn't understand what she was doing with all these jugs and all these seeds, and why does she bother with seeds? Why doesn't she just go buy plants? And Trudy Davidoff's comment was, look, people who haven't done it, they don't understand. They're non-believers. They're not there yet. So be patient with them the way we are with our seeds, and show them the first spring they come up. They'll be curious to see this is really working, and then take them to the nursery and show them the prices on the plants. If you were to even be able to get those species, you will be amazed at how much money is saved. And remember that nurseries aren't selling most of these species. Nurseries are selling only a handful of native plants, and you can grow so many more different species by growing from seed. So you take these non-believers and you show them the nurseries, you show them the botanic gardens, and you say, see these, we have all these same plants. And her final comment was, the disbeliever must witness the miracle to understand the passion. So I hope you're not disbelievers. If you were like me, you're not anymore. And I hope you feel the passion and take it forth and grow your own native plants. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and share my table with you with all this stuff that I want to show you. And if you want to plant along with me, you can. Let's see, I'm just going to rearrange a little bit here so that I can. Oops. Let's see. Now I'm going to be official, put on my Master Gardener apron, and we'll get to work. So, starting with preparing the containers. This is a jug, and I've marked on it where I would make the holes. I prefer to use a little rotary tool, has a drill bit on the end. A regular drill works fine, but it's not really necessary. Some people use an awl. They just puncture the hole. With that, I think it's easier to use something like an X-Acto knife, twist it around, make the holes. Now I make the holes. I like to do it in this ridge. If you've got a ridge like this in the bottom, and then I put the holes around the outside, about a ½ inch up. And then I line it with newspaper, and that creates a sort of self-watering system. So I always have a little reservoir. You remember I said water is a real problem for me, making sure everything stays moist enough. So this way everything can drain. It's not going to flood. It's not going to get too wet, but there will always be some moisture there. This rubber band around the outside was a trick that I learned in a Facebook group for cutting the top. You puncture a hole and then you get started, and you go all the way around following the rubber band, and you know you're going to end up at the beginning. My first dozens of jugs before I learned to do this, of course, I never ended up exactly where I started from. So this is a real neat trick. Okay, what do we have next? Okay, then line it with newspaper. There's my jug lined with newspaper, and then go back the hinge, fill it with soil. And my soil is pretty moist, but it's not wet. I'm just going to pour it into the jug. You could scoop it out, depends on what your soil's in. Okay. And then I'm going to add some water because it's still a little too dry, but I don't want it running all over my table. So not too much. Okay. Then I'm going to put in some seeds, and start with Joe Pye weed seeds. I'm just going to smooth out the soil. I have a nice even surface. I'm not pressing down too hard. I don't want to compact the soil. I just want it to be relatively flat. And now different seeds go down differently. I'm going to somebody described this as salting the seeds. you know, holding the seeds between your fingers and just distributing the seeds evenly. Now with these jugs, you know, there's this little indentation here where it comes in for the handle. So I tend to stay away from that area because otherwise, you know, the plants will grow up and they won't have any place to go. So I just sort of leave that blank and plant every place else. Okay, now if I were doing a container like this lettuce container, it would be very much the same, but you wouldn't have to worry about where the handle is. You would just plant it evenly. And so once I get the seeds in there, then I press them down gently so that there's good contact with the soil. Now, I'm going to water them. I could use a spray bottle, which is good with these seeds because you see some of the seeds flew right out. They have their own little wings. The Joe Pye, asters, those seeds that are, you know, the wind-blown, wind-dispersed seeds will fly away. So I wet them a little, tap them down, and then I may put some more water gently so that they stay put and they meet the soil. And the soil, the water, and all subsequent water, the rain, the snow, everything will work those seeds into where they need to be in order to germinate. Then I make my label, my tag, and let's see. What I do is I put my tag there. No, let me do it afterwards. Let me close it up. Close it up. Just kind of fit it in like a little puzzle. And then I put my tag in and oops, not cooperating right now. The tag will hold it in place. Could put a piece of tape right here. What I like to do is because I use primarily these jugs, I put them all together in cardboard boxes, and I have them outside in the boxes, and they stay contained in the boxes, and then the lids don't blow up at all. So I've stopped taping altogether. So that's the Joe Pye. Now, if I were doing seeds like this lupin, you know, lupin seeds, they are, they're hard to tell. They are bigger. They're not wind dispersed, so they don't have their little wings. They're more like, let's see, can you see that? They're like, I don't know, small peas. These I would do differently. These I would press into the soil until they are even with the top of the soil. And then I would put some more soil on top of them so that they're further into the ground than I did the Joe Pye. These could be soaked in advance. The problem with soaking is that it could, if you get a real cold spell now, the seeds may not survive. So I don't tend to do any artificial stratification or scarification on my seeds. I just let nature do what she's going to do. And then I have just this, one other thing. I have this. I wanted to show you. This is happens to be a pot. This happens to be coriander, you know, cilantro. It's not a native plant, but it could be. I could have planted the lupins in this, and then I'm just going to cover it with this other plastic container to make that dome. I'll remove the labels, and I'll probably put some tape to hold it, 2 pieces of tape. And so I, created my little greenhouse like that. I guess that's about it. What have I not covered? Oh, dividing. Well, I had a picture of this in my slide. This is microgreens, but this is what your winter sowing could look like in May or June. And then you just can cut it with a knife. I have just a straight blade here. I usually use an old kitchen knife, and we just cut it up into chunks and plant it into larger pots. And I think I said I keep my seedlings in pots for the most part for at least 1 year. Sometimes I keep them in the very jugs. Sometimes I put them into larger pots, but I like to kind of have them segregated, and then I can move them around. If I need, for example, the milkweed, if I need it someplace else, I can move it to someplace else in the garden. And that. So the end of the demonstration. I hope you've gained some confidence to go out and do this yourself, because it is a phenomenal way to grow plants. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lynn. This was really a great instruction. It makes me very confident too.
Good. I wanted to, just before I forget, I want to thank another one of our Master Gardener volunteers, Jill Eisenstein, who's responsible for putting together all the little planting kits that our attendees got. I don't want to forget Jill. So I'm sorry, Catherine.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question. You just mentioned that you like to keep your seedlings for an entire year.
Yeah.
So when do you actually plant them in the soil in the garden? Is that the next spring, or?
Sometimes I do plant them in that fall. Sometimes I do. It depends on what they are and how big they are. That's for me, that's the important point, is how mature are they? But very often it'll be the following spring. I finish my winter sowing for the year, and I go out and I plant last year's winter sowing seedlings. And they're already, at that point, they're mature plants. Most of them will bloom that second year. And so I've got garden worthy plants at that point.
Okay. That's really important. So how do they spend the winter? Do you bring them in, or?
No, never. These plants born to be outside, like you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I just, a footnote, we didn't go into this, but winter sowing can be used to grow a lot of vegetables also. I just mentioned that for anyone who wants to experiment. You can start plants like tomatoes, and certainly all your cold loving, kale, cabbage, all of the brassicas can be started with winter sowing. And you just wouldn't want to start things that are very tender. For those, you'll wait till it warms up. But everything else, now that I've done the winter sowing, of my perennials, and I say, well, now what am I going to do? I'll just start my squashes and kales and whatever, and just keep going. So it's kind of addictive.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Jane Ellen. And we'll see you on the pathway. Please join the Putnam Pollinator Pathway. Come and meet us at our events. Come and swap seeds with us, and tell stories, and join our Facebook group if you participate in Facebook, and share your pictures. We'd love to see them.
Thank you everyone for listening.
Yeah.